It was the last weekend of summer, and the seniors of Maple High School were on a camping trip to celebrate the end of their high school years. The trip, organized by the school, took them deep into the woods, far from the comforts of their suburban homes. Among the group was Alex, a quiet and introverted teenager who had always felt out of place among his more outgoing peers. The camp was set up in a clearing surrounded by dense forest. The trees towered above, their branches interlocking to form a natural canopy that blocked out much of the sunlight even during the day. As night fell, the woods became a shadowy labyrinth, filled with the rustling of leaves and the distant calls of nocturnal creatures. On the second night, the students gathered around a large bonfire. They roasted marshmallows, shared stories, and laughed, the flames casting flickering shadows on their faces. As the evening wore on, the teachers called for lights out, reminding everyone to stay within the camp boundaries. But Alex, feeling suffocated by the crowd, wandered off into the woods. He had always found solace in nature, and the idea of a quiet walk under the stars was too tempting to resist. He walked until the noise from the campfire faded, replaced by the whispers of the forest. He wasn't worried. He had his phone and a flashlight. But when he reached for his pocket, he realized he had left his phone behind. Panic started to creep in, but he pushed it aside, focusing on the path he was following. The night air was cool, and the forest around him seemed alive with the sounds of crickets and distant animal calls. After a while, Alex decided it was time to head back. But as he turned around, he realized he had wandered further than he thought. The path he thought he was following seemed unfamiliar, the trees around him all looking the same. He tried to retrace his steps, but the more he walked, the more lost he felt. As the hours passed, the forest grew darker and colder. Alex's flashlight flickered and died, leaving him in near-total darkness. He could barely see his hand in front of his face. He called out, hoping someone from the camp would hear him, but his voice was swallowed by the night. Suddenly he heard a rustling behind him. He spun around, heart pounding, but saw nothing. Then, from the darkness, came a faint, eerie laughter. It sounded distant but unmistakable, a high-pitched giggle that sent a chill down his spine. "Hello!" Alex called, his voice trembling. "Who's there?" There was no response, only the laughter growing closer. He started to back away, his eyes darting around, searching for the source of the sound. The laughter was joined by other noises, whispering voices, rustling leaves, and the crackling of twigs underfoot. It felt like the forest was alive, watching him, mocking him. In his fear, Alex stumbled and fell, his hands scraping against the rough ground. As he tried to get up, he caught a glimpse of something moving between the trees. It was quick, almost too fast to see, but there was definitely something, or someone out there. The stories his classmates had shared around the campfire flashed through his mind. Stories of skinwalkers, shape-shifting creatures that could take the form of animals or even other humans. Creatures that could mimic voices and lure their victims deeper into the woods. He had dismissed them as silly tales, but now, alone in the dark, he wasn't so sure. The noises were all around him now, the laughter and whispers blending into a cacophony of sound. He scrambled to his feet and ran, not knowing where he was going, only that he needed to get away. Branches whipped at his face, and roots seemed to reach up from the ground to trip him, but he kept running. He ran until he could run no more, collapsing against a tree, gasping for breath. The forest was silent again, but the silence was oppressive, suffocating. He felt eyes on him, unseen but palpable. He tried to steady his breathing, to calm his racing heart, but the fear was too strong. Then, from the darkness, he saw them, glowing eyes staring at him from the shadows. They were too high off the ground to be an animal, and they moved with a fluidity that sent a wave of terror through him. As they got closer, he could make out the faint outlines of figures, humanoid but wrong, their limbs too long, their movements too smooth. The laughter started again, a chorus of voices that seemed to come from all around him. Alex pressed his back against the tree, his mind racing. The figures circled him, their eyes glowing brighter, the whispers growing louder. He knew he was surrounded, trapped. In a moment of sheer desperation, Alex remembered the advice his grandfather had once given him about surviving in the woods. If you're ever lost, stay put. People will come looking for you. He had no idea if anyone would find him, but he clung to that hope, the only thing keeping him from breaking down completely. The figures stopped circling, standing just outside the circle of faint moonlight that filtered through the trees. They seemed to be waiting, watching him with an eerie patience. Alex closed his eyes, praying that it was all a nightmare, that he would wake up safe in his tent. But when he opened his eyes, they were still there, and now one of them was stepping forward. It moved slowly, deliberately, until it was just a few feet away. In the dim light, Alex could see its face, pale, almost translucent, with eyes that glowed a sickly yellow. It smiled, revealing sharp, needle-like teeth. The laughter rose to a crescendo, the voices merging into a single, horrific sound. Alex wanted to scream, to run, but his body was frozen in place, paralyzed by fear. The figure reached out a hand, its fingers impossibly long and thin, reaching for him. Just as the hand was about to touch him, there was a blinding flash of light, and a loud, booming voice shouted, "Get away from him!" The figures recoiled, hissing, and fled back into the shadows. Alex blinked, trying to clear his vision, and saw a group of people rushing towards him, his teachers and classmates, armed with flashlights and lanterns. "Alex, are you okay?" one of the teachers asked, kneeling beside him. He nodded, still too shaken to speak. They helped him to his feet, and he realized he was crying. As they led him back to camp, he glanced back at the forest. The glowing eyes were gone, the laughter silenced, but the sense of being watched remained. Back at the campsite, Alex was given a warm blanket and a hot drink. He sat by the fire, surrounded by his classmates, who looked at him with a mix of concern and curiosity. The teachers asked him what had happened, but he could barely describe it. All he knew was that he had seen something that shouldn't exist. The rest of the trip was cut short, and they returned to school the next morning. Alex never spoke about that night again, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed him back from the woods. He avoided the forest after that, and when asked why, he would just shrug and change the subject. But in the quiet of the night, when he was alone in his room, he could still hear the faint echo of laughter and see the glow of eyes watching him from the shadows.